So looking at the specifics of kind of neuroscience, neurochemistry, and the relationship of brain and consciousness, I suppose the most common evidence used in support of a emergent theory, a materialist theory, is the very, very tight correlations between brain and mind and the effects of things such as general anesthesia, diseases such as rabies that can change a personality, and various things like that, alcohol. And because of the direct effects on personality and behaviour, it's seen as very strong evidence to suggest that the brain creates consciousness, which it is certainly strong evidence to suggest that.
Yes.
So what's your thought on that interpretation of
Well,
the
it's I
correlations?
think to use a simple analogy, it's a bit like William James, the founder of American psychology, and he was also a philosopher. He did a lecture on the various possibilities concerning in 1898. It was at Harvard, and he proposed three possibilities regarding the mind-brain relationship, and one of them was the transmissive or interactive point of view, mind consciousness with the brain. And in modern technology, we can use a TV set, for instance. If you use the TV set, and let's say you play with your TV set, the screen, and you may alter the reception of the information, which are, in fact, we talk about electromagnetic waves that are produced by a TV station, and it's transduced as sounds and also as words, for instance, language. But if electronically you modify something in the circuits, you may alter the reception of the electromagnetic waves and the decoding of the waves. And so, let's say you're listening to the news, in the evening. The anchor, for instance, let's say that the anchor vanished from the screen. The anchor is still at the TV station reading the news. So you can open your TV set. You won't find the anchor in the TV set, and so that's the kind of analogy that has been used by many scientists, not only myself, but so of course, when there's a lesion, because there's in the brain you have a certain amount of specialization, specific functions in various regions. For instance, some regions are more concerned with memories, and others are more related to the processing of emotions, for instance. But let's say you have a lesion, you have a vascular accident, and it produces a lesion in certain area of the structure involved in memory. You will have memory deficits following that, but it doesn't mean that mind, including the faculty of memory, are produced by this region. They can interact. It's the output that you need, and the output cannot be delivered anymore because it's when we're seeing
like
you can use this hypothesis, and this in his lecture, that's what William James did in 1898. He proposed this possibility of mind-brain relationships. So the brain was, he said, could be considered as a sort of interface for the relationship between the mental functions, and including consciousness and brain activity.
Now, I'm not certain, but I think it was scientist Sean Carroll who wrote an article stating that it was either life after death is impossible or very, 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 very unlikely. And he used the argument that if the brain was an interface for consciousness, or if the philosophy of dualism, I think it's substance dualism, I'm not sure, was true, then we would we'd be able to see a specific location in the brain that was receiving that consciousness, and there would be material readings showing that interaction where the mind is received, that the part of the brain that actually receives it would light up, I suppose, and we don't see that, so therefore that isn't a reasonable theory. What's your thought on that kind of idea?
Well, it doesn't mean that it's not the case. It's only because of technical limitations. Because, for instance, if you use functional brain imaging, all the colored spots, the hot spots that you see in the scientific publications, they are the results of mathematical computations. So they are not, you don't see the cerebral tissue live in action. There's no technology allowing to do that unless you put electrodes in the neurons, but it's not been done in this context, given ethical principles, obviously, in humans. So we don't know, really. Also, when we talk about this question, we have to remind people that a thought is, in my view at least, it's a real phenomenon, but it's a non-physical phenomenon. It doesn't have a weight, a volume, a color, or a shape, I don't think. Still, it can exert a great influence on the brain. And it's a bit like the wind. You don't see it, but you can measure its impact. And so that's what I would say regarding this question.
Yes. So, using the analogy that you mentioned, we can see that things like general anesthesia, which affect the brain, simply suppress the brain's ability to translate the consciousness into an outward experience. So,
yes,
what
exactly.
about things like alcohol or diseases like rabies, or the example of a man who had an accident? I think he had a pipe or something go through his eye into his brain, and as a result, his personality completely changed. So it wasn't a case of suppressing the output of the brain; it was completely altering a personality. How would you say that matches up with a dualistic idea?
Yeah, you have to consider this type of phenomenon, but this is clinical psychology. This is a famous case in clinical neuropsychology. And what it shows is that the brain plays a great role in in mental functions and the transmission also of mental processes and so on and so forth. But yes, you can, if you need a healthy brain to be able to have access to all your mental faculties. Otherwise, there will be deficits, impairments, and it shows that the brain is the most complex biological system that we know, and it's nearly 100 billion neurons interacting with each other, and on average, you have about 5,000 synaptic contacts between neurons, and so imagine it's even more complex than anything we know in the universe. So, yeah, the brain is very precious. But what's interesting is if you take cases of people suffering from neurological impairments or dementia, there are cases of people like that who've had clinical death, or people suffering from, let's say, congenital blindness, which is related to the optical system, the visual system. When if the heart stops and the person is clinically dead, and if she suffers from neurological impairments or even psychiatric conditions, disorders, the person is free while she's clinically dead. She's free from all the limitations created by the brain, the nervous system. So what William James was saying, and I think he was right, is that the brain is not only an interface, but it's also a filter which restricts the conscious access to other domains of reality, if you will.
Sure. And of course, we also have experiences like terminal lucidity in dementia patients that seem to add to that belief. Mm.
Yeah.
So I wonder, I know we're strapped for time, so one last question. Are you familiar with the philosophy of metaphysical idealism, which is one that seems to have cropped up a lot recently?
Pardon me?
Metaphysical idealism. Are you familiar with that philosophy?
Oh, yes, a lot.
So what's your thoughts on that, which essentially says that it's not so much that the brain is a filter and that there's a consciousness and a brain and the consciousness comes through the brain, but that the brain is consciousness as it appears in physical reality?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, but I'm not sure about that. I would say what I propose in the my own view of the post-materialist paradigm, the way I develop it, it's that, and it was in the Manifesto for Post-Materialist Science, what we consider to be physical and what we consider to be mental are two complementary aspects of what we could call a reality with an uppercase letter R. And these two manifestations, they originate from a common source, a unifying or creating principle. That's my metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So at a certain level, so in other words, as human beings, we believe in the physical world, in our experience, and to a certain extent, it's true. However, during my life, I've had several mystical experiences, non-dual experiences. And to me, I agree with what people say in the Vedantic tradition, that it's an illusion, that there's only one principle, one source, one being, at an absolute level. But we live in the physical world and also in the mental world, the world of psychology. It's all relative. It's part of a relative experience. So we're not, but in some cases, and it's been reported in some cases by near-death experiencers, these near-death experiencers, they go sometimes beyond the duality, and instead of seeing the light as Jesus or Buddha or God, they merge with the light and they become one. They become they become the entire, the whole, the totality, the universe, the absolute.
Something beyond language, certainly.
Yes, definitely. So that's my metaphysics, but it's based on experiential data or evidence, if you will, in my case.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. So I suppose before we end, is there anything else you think important to add?
Don't believe in everything scientists are telling you, especially neuroscientists. Don't believe that your biological robots totally determined by your neurons, your chemical transmitters, your genes, and so on and so forth, because it's not true. We didn't have the time to discuss that, but I've done several brain imaging studies showing that in reality, you can consciously and intentionally influence even the deep structures, the so-called primitive structures of the brain. And in that sense, we have a great power. We can exert a great influence over what's going on in our nervous system and also in all the other physiological systems that are part of the body, because they all constitute what we call a psychosomatic network. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that don't believe them when they say that consciousness is only a byproduct of brain activity, because obviously it's not true. It's only a belief system now. Those who are holding to this kind of philosophical view, they are ignoring voluntarily the data, all the evidence that is out there.
Or
That's
simply aren't aware of it.
Or yes, in some cases that's true. They are ignorant. Yeah, they talk, but they don't investigate. They don't explore. And shouldn't do that. If you want to pronounce it, at least you should check the data, the evidence. And
yes,
but
absolutely,
they don't do that all the time. That's right.
And I suppose regarding your neuroimaging studies, anybody can find that in various online resources on YouTube or in your books.
Yes. Actually, I was the first scientist to show that we can use our intention and our consciousness to self-regulate the primitive portions of the brain that are related to emotions. So that was it was at the beginning of the new millennium, and that created a new field of research that was called emotional self-regulation and the brain. And since then, there have been hundreds of studies on this field. But yeah, you can find it. It's easy to find.